What's up, everyone? Welcome to Sir Hunt's Reviews. In this video, we're going to be discussing everything House of the Dragon for at least the first season. I'm going to explain a little bit of who are on the greens and who are on the blacks, which are the two opposing sides of House Targaryen that this series is most likely going to, feature on. I'm also going to discuss four potential casting that I think would make, excellent additions to the cast. And I'm also going to discuss the timeline of when the show is actually going to come out. Now, before we get started, please slap a like on this video, as the like goal is going to be 100. Also, make sure you're subscribed, and this is the most important part. Make sure you have your notifications turned on, so that way you get alerted every single time I drop a video throughout this long night. Now, in order to keep this video under 2 hours, I'm going to suggest you go ahead and go watch a video that I did recently with Aziz from History of Westeros, and we talked more about the events that lead up to the Greens versus the Blacks, or the Dance of the Dragons. So in this video, I'm more so focusing on people who are already familiar with that information, so go watch that video before you watch this one. Jumping right into things, I think one of the main characters on the green side of things is going to be King Aegon II. Now, this dude is pretty much like a Joffrey who got to grow up. Not quite as sadistic as Joffrey, but more so in the side of like a privileged individual who causes a lot of issues, turmoil, and betrayal and all types of stuff for the main characters. Now, King Aegon II Targaryen is probably going to be a bit on the Jaime Lannister side as well, so that sort of influenced who I think would, which actor would I think is known enough, but not known in the sense that whatever role he was known for will overshadow this new role of playing King Aegon II. So it'd kind of be a bit like Jaime Lannister and Joffrey. My choices for that are the first one being Damian Lewis. Now, as you can see right here on his wiki page, this is an English actor. He's most known for the HBO miniseries Band of Brothers, and that right there is sort of my leading choice. I've actually never seen Band of Brothers, but the fact that he's already worked with HBO lets me know that that relationship is already there as far as casting. Now, HBO, especially with Game of Thrones cast, has been known to recycle characters. Just off the top of my head, Marjorie Tyrell had a pretty prominent role in the Rome series. So there's a bunch of actors and actresses on Game of Thrones who were used in HBO series previously. So this guy, Damian, if they wanted to go for an older Aegon II Targaryen, which is kind of what they did for Game of Thrones, they aged all the actors up a bit, just kind of worked better. Daenerys is not a 12-year-old girl at the beginning of the series. So keeping in line with those things, I feel like Damian Lewis could be a pretty good candidate if they wanted to go the older route. Now, they may actually want to make him younger since they're going to be casting Alicent, who's his mom, and that leads me into my second choice, who is actually Will Poulter. And this dude was supposed to be playing a bit of a major role on the Lord of the Rings Amazon series, but he obviously got, I think he pulled out from that or something, or got fired, some crazy shit like that. But he's also known for Black Mirror. He was in a pretty famous episode of Black Mirror. It was called Bandersnatch. Not too big of a fan of it. His accent was ridiculous. It was almost like so comical, it took me out of it. But his acting skills are there. His voice acting needs a little bit of work. So maybe I'm thinking he left that Lord of the Rings show because he found out about House of the Dragon. And obviously, who wouldn't want to be on a rawer fantasy version? I don't know. Maybe HBO paid him more. I'm not sure. But I feel like he would be a good choice to play Aegon II. He's got a bit of that twisted look. That Joffrey had the look like something was wrong with him, but you didn't know what it was. Obviously, he's this sadistic, cruel bastard, but he also has a look of like something's a little bit off with that guy. He might be a little bit TikToked. I don't know. Will Poulter kind of has that look too. He looks like he would be a good, sort of like a crueler version of Aegon II. And we do know that Dan and Dave and the writers and everyone involved with Game of Thrones, when it comes to the times they did follow things that actually happened in the book, they tend to up it a little bit. Like, we do know that Robb Stark's wife is actually still alive somewhere, and in the show, she got stabbed in the stomach. It was, like, pretty brutal to watch, but the show is famous for doing things like that. So with Aegon II, there's a scene where, this is, I guess, spoilers. This would be, like, one of the last seasons of the show, I guess, or maybe it depends on the time range of how they speed things up, but one of the events with King Aegon II, I feel like Will Poulter, I can just see him in that scene. Sort of just to summarize, he's feeding someone to his dragon who is already damaged. And his dragon is not able to fly. So it's that alone has the potential of sort of just having like a devastating effect on viewers. Like, it's a pretty traumatic scene, and I feel like when that happens, one of the main characters who gets fed to his dragon dying is sort of like one of those Red Wedding-esque type moments for average show watchers who would have no idea that type of thing is coming. As far as Queen Alicent, just to sort of pick things up a little bit, I could see Ruth Wilson being a pretty good choice. Now, I had actually never heard of her until I watched this show that came out last year. It wasn't... I mean, it was okay. You could tell that it was meant to be a children's show. I was kind of hoping it would be a bit edgier, like HBO is famous for, but it's called His Dark Materials. She plays the mother of Lyra, and she's a pretty good actress. I think she has a lot of stage presence as well. And as far as Alicent being King Aegon II's mother, she's obviously going to be a Cersei. She's a bit of Cersei mixed with a few other characters. I could see someone who has experience doing like actual drama in the theater, which she does have a lot of experience doing that, but also being relatively unknown so that, you know, whatever role she had before, I can't think of her character's name in His Dark Materials, but she's got a pretty big role in that. She plays Lyra's mother, who's like a bit of a baddie, at least in the first season. So I feel like, not to mention the fact that just like before, with Damian Lewis having a relationship with HBO, Ruth Wilson has a relationship with HBO, obviously with His Dark Materials. So that makes it kind of easy. I do know that His Dark Materials has a pretty big following, I would say, but something like Game of Thrones has a massive following. So if for some reason those shows were to conflict with each other, well, that open relationship with HBO allows them to work around that. You know, I feel like Ruth Wilson is a really good choice. A strong choice to play Queen Alicent on the greens. It's ironic that her Wikipedia page has her wearing a green blouse, which if she were to be cast as Queen Alicent, being like sort of the Queen Dowager, she would be wearing a lot of green gowns. So I think it's, I don't know, pretty cool. You guys let me know what you think down below in the comment section about Ruth Wilson. Another choice that I have for playing Queen Alicent, and this one I don't think is as likely, but Rosamund Pike. Now she... I remember seeing her in a few movies back when I was growing up. I can't even think of the names of those, but it says she was in Doom. She was also in Die Another Day, which, if I'm not mistaken, she was a Bond girl. That was when Pierce Brosnan was Bond, and that was the Bond that I grew up with, like Die Another Day, The World Never Forget, some shit like that. But I remember seeing her and being like, oh yeah, that's pretty cool. So she would be along the lines of being, I guess, if they were to go a route of casting a younger, because you can't really have an older version. So Damian Lewis is kind of not really. I just like that dude. I feel like he would be a good choice to play King Aegon II. Maybe he could be cast in the show as another character, but Rosamund Pike again goes along with that lines of them keeping the cast sort of at least a similar age to they are in the novels. Now, Queen Alicent, if I could please jump back to her. Queen Alicent, just for a quick summary, like I mentioned before, she's the leader of the Greens. It's kind of her idea to sort of push this whole thing along, right? So her husband, Viserys the First Targaryen, dies. Kind of like, not necessarily out of nowhere, but he dies with a bunch of, like, shit left unfinished. She jumps on that, and in her actions causes the Greens versus the Blacks and the Great Targaryen Civil War that destroyed most of their dragons. Their house never recovered from it. And then when we watch Daenerys Targaryen and Viserys in Game of Thrones Season 1, that's all that's left of House Targaryen. And this Civil War was the preeminent cursor to that, several hundred years before the events of Game of Thrones. But Queen Alicent is a bit of a Littlefinger in that sense. As we all know, Littlefinger had a behind the scenes, played a big role in executing the War of the Five Kings. The show kind of does that. It's more, like I said, I've said this several times in my newest videos, the books are the real story, and that's not finished. So in the real story, Littlefinger has a lot bigger role, and it's a lot clear that his intentions are intelligently motivated and not just some dingus who would allow himself to get trapped in Winterfell, surrounded by enemies, and his throat slit on the floor, groveling for his life. I feel like they really blew the bucket with not having him do that faceless man scene. Like, it was, we're not talking about Game of Thrones, but anyway, Alicent is a bit like Littlefinger in the sense that her actions directly cause the Greens versus the Blacks. Now, after Viserys Targaryen dies, she's the one who calls a small council meeting with Sir Otto Hightower and a bunch of others, and proclaims that her son, King Aegon II, who I was just talking about, I think Will Poulter would be the best to play that role, basically declares him king. And then we'll jump into the Blacks. The Blacks are the opposing side, and before Viserys one Targaryen died, he actually made it so that long before he died, when he didn't have any sons, he made Rhaenyra the next in line. And Alicent knew that, but jumped on it and was like, you know what? My son, King Aegon I, who is, according to primogeniture, the rightful ruler. I can't remember if primogeniture is age or if it goes like male first, regardless of age. But either way, that's where the dispute came in, and then we'll jump into the Blacks. Now, two of the main characters for the Blacks are obviously going to be who I just mentioned, Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen. Now, Rhaenyra, I'm actually super excited to talk about because she's going to be like the reincarnation of Daenerys that never was. We'll get to see if Daenerys grew up in Westeros and her family was still alive. Sort of like how I envision this Rhaenyra. Now, I think as far as casting, it would probably go towards the younger side. But, there is always a possibility of everything being aged up. I think another prominent aspect that'll be awesome, I think, is kind of important, is whoever they cast, and my casting choices don't necessarily look like Emilia Clarke, but they kind of have to look like Emilia Clarke and Harry Lloyd, I think is his name or something, the actor who played King Viserys, or the would-be king. He was crowned. He got his golden crown, just not the traditional sense. But I think it's important that at least some of these actors, the majority of them, somewhat resemble Emilia Clarke and her brother in the show. It's important that we see that they're related. A lot of people are thinking they have the chance to do Purple Eyes, and just as a side note, in my opinion, I don't think so. That's not what they did in the first series, so it wouldn't make sense for them to do it in the spinoff series, which is, I guess, a prequel. It is taking place before, but it doesn't make sense. And we all know those contacts can be ridiculously annoying. If you're on set for 16 hours a day, filming the same 3 scenes over and over again, you think you want to wear the same kind of contacts that cut off all circulation to your eyes? No, probably not. It's already probably miserable conditions for just having to do the same repetitive thing over again. I'm pretty sure something like wearing purple eye contacts that distort your eyes a lot would get annoying. And not only that, in my opinion, obviously it was done in The Witcher, and at times in The Witchers, when Anya Shalatra was doing scenes, like she played Yennefer, in certain scenes it looked really good. The CGI was on point, but when she was outside in daylight, when the background was just wherever they filmed at, it looked like she was wearing contacts, and I kind of felt like she was cosplaying as Yennefer. It doesn't work all the time. So I think it would just be wise to just continue with what Game of Thrones did and just not do it. It is an important aspects in the books. The Targaryens have deep purple, lilac, all these beautiful colored eyes, and not having it on the show kind of sucks, but also from a practical standpoint, just doesn't make sense. CGI technology is not there enough. They would have to wear contacts in some scenes. A lot of it will be filmed outside. You know how Game of Thrones does. They like to go and film at ruined castles, like actual locations. Those type of contacts just take you out of the show. It's not necessary. You don't really need it. But as far as Rhaenyra, I hope they find someone who looks similar to Daenerys. But I feel like just for the hell of it, Kate Winslet would be a really good choice. I'm always been a massive fan of Kate Winslet. I mean, how could you not be? My favorite movie, personally, that she did was Eternal Sunshine of a Spotless Mind. That's like one of my favorite all-time movies with her and Jim Carrey. I don't really need to spend too much time talking about her. I do feel like that's like the least likely choice because she's pretty well known, and most of her know her. Most people who know her as whatever character she was in their favorite movie. She's been in so many. It's kind of hard to watch a scene with her and not be thinking about all the other roles she's played. And like, I wonder how this character, it'll be too much. But I feel like it would, it's possible. The more likely choice I think is Imogen Poots. I know I didn't say her name right, but she's obviously an English actress. She was in Need for Speed. Like a Jimi Hendrix biopic. She's also done some stage acting. She's known enough where people will be like, oh, hey, I know her from such and such, but also not enough where the average show watcher is going to be like, hey, she looks kind of familiar, but then focus on whatever the scene is, not like being distracted from that. I do think her acting talent is up there. A lot of the Game of Thrones actors and actresses weren't well known when they started. A few of them were, but their acting talent got better as the series progressed. So I think Imogen Poots has a good starting point. You want some strong actors that aren't that well known, but can also have enough experience. Like she was in 28 Weeks Later in 2007. That's one of my favorite zombie picks of all time. She's got some lengthy experience in dealing with film and television and all that stuff. So I feel like it's important to have someone who's beautiful. Obviously she is, but also that can act. And Imogen Poots, I feel like, is a strong choice to play Rhaenyra. Now moving on, another main character. Obviously, there's going to be a lot more from the Greens and the Blacks, but another one on the Black side of things is, in fact, give me 1 second, going to be, in my opinion, Daemon Targaryen. Prince Daemon Targaryen. Now, this dude is an all-around badass. Picture Jaime Lannister as a Targaryen. He's, I would say, probably the second most prominent character on the Black sides as far as some of the scenes that he's in. Now, without giving away too much, you can go and watch the video that I did with the Zeus if you want some details on his character. But I feel like he's going to be someone who has a bit of, like, the cockiness that Jaime does in the beginning before Jaime loses his hand. Well, I mean, Jaime Lannister. Jaime goes back and forth the entire series, which is part of the beautifulness of that character. But this guy is going to be sort of like Jaime, but also I think the Blacks are going to be portrayed as the Starks in the sense that they'll be the good guys and the ones that are sort of downtrodden on. They had the shit taken from right under them. So I feel like Daemon Targaryen is going to be a bit of an Avenger. So he might be a little bit like Robb Stark, a bit of the cockiness and arrogantness that Tyrion himself has as well as Jaime, but a bit of that Lannister mixed with a Stark mixed with Targaryen. He does have that air of entitlement to him. As far as some good acting choices for who could play him, now this one is a bit of a throwaway like the Kate Winslet one, but Jude Law. I mean, this dude, come on. He's been in so many different movies. HBO has a history of casting British actors to play these traditional British roles because Americans don't do that great of a job of British accents, but also they tend to do a lot more period and historical dramas, so it makes sense if they're cast for roles that require actors to have a British accent, but also period and drama background and acting and experience. So, don't want to spend too much time with it. Everybody knows Jude Law. My favorite movie that he was in Repo Men with Forrest Whitaker. That was one of the, I don't know if it was like a redo of Repo the Genetic Opera, which is some shit I've never seen before, but Repo Men was a really good movie that Jude Law was in. But on to a more serious choice, I feel like Charlie Hunnam. That guy would probably be the best Daemon Targaryen. Now, he's been off of, what is that? What is something with the bikers? I can't even think of that dumbass show. It'll probably say it right here. Let me look at this. Sons of Anarchy. Okay, so yeah, that show's been off for a while. We do know that he did a King Arthur movie, so he's got that period drama experience. He's also done some stage plays in England, and this dude just has Targaryen written all over him. And if you did a side-by-side a few generations apart, you could see the likeness of the actor who played, I think his name is Harry Lloyd, Viserys, and he doesn't really look like Emilia Clarke, but you could see, distant relatives for sure. This dude has the acting chops. I feel like Daemon Targaryen has to be obviously a bit of a looker. This dude, can be one of those Jaime Lannister-esque type, drawing in the female audience type of character. As far as some more prominent things that Daemon is known for, obviously Daemon was a skilled warrior. He's described as being dashing, daring, and dangerous. He was also ambitious, impetuous, merciful, amoral, reckless, and quick to take offense. So as far as the Jaime Lannister is screaming all over that character. I think that's going to be a big sort of recurring theme in this show, is we're going to have characters that remind us of major characters from Game of Thrones, but also it's a more cutthroat and ruthless of a time, and they're going to take that and show you that it was a bit like the treachery and the betrayal in Game of Thrones was at a level 10. This show was going to make it go to an 11, and I'm super excited to see that. Now, we kind of talked a little bit about who I thought would be casting, as well as a little bit about who are the greens and the blacks. And like I said, I did a more in-depth video that I'll link down below in the description. But I think the last thing to wrap this video up, the best thing to be able to do would be talk about the timeline for the actual air date. Now, if it hadn't have been for COVID and the world being on shutdown, I'm pretty sure we would have had some casting details. They would have been able to at least finish most of the writing. I feel like writers probably work the best when they're in the same room, sort of shooting ideas at each other. They get to spend time, hang out, and then, spend as much time as they can developing characters and getting that first season written, at least a rough draft of it. Once that gets done, then they have sort of full character descriptions. They know more in depth of which actors to look for. And that casting process obviously has been skewed way far off. We probably, there's a few countries that are opening back up to filming. I think New Zealand is opening back up in August. Hollywood, I don't see that happening. Luckily, Game of Thrones doesn't film there. They film in Ireland and mostly in parts of Europe. So as far as how long I think it is before we have a cast announced, I would say within the next 6 months, we'll at least have several of the main characters. The Alicent, Rhaenyra, the Prince Daemon, the King Aegon II. We'll at least know as far as who they're looking at. We got to remember that this show was actually greenlit for an entire first series, not just for a pilot. So usually with a pilot episode, they'll spend time casting characters, but nowhere near as long as they will as when a show's been greenlit. If I had to guess, this show, a lot of people forget, this show started being worked on in 2016. That was 4 years ago. If I had to guess, I would say there was a pilot that was filmed. It was good enough to greenlight a first season, but not good enough to keep that same cast. That's why we haven't heard any information. So if I had to guess, they're in the process now of filling out from where that pilot left off. Obviously, it's just the first episode. They're filling out the entire season. They're making the writing probably far superior than the first season of Game of Thrones. We have to remember that even though most of the audience that hated Season 8 is online, and the average show watcher probably, just enjoyed it as a casual show watcher would. It's like the bigger the fan you are, the more you know about the show, the more of an opinion you have about it. So those people are very vocal online. HBO's aware of that. They've seen that. They're taking this time, in my opinion, and using it to their advantage to get out all the quirks and the kinks in the writing. They also have more time to work with George because George has nothing but free time. He has time to work on writing Winds of Winter. He has time to fully develop the show. And remember, the two people responsible for being showrunners, Ryan Condal and Miguel Sapochnik. Ryan Condal may not have that much experience with the Game of Thrones background, but Miguel Sapochnik does. He directed some of the biggest episodes of Game of Thrones. So he's got that experience of what the audience is looking for. Then you've got Ryan Condal, who's completely capable in running shows like Colony and everything else. And then on top of all that, you got George R. R. Martin playing a bigger role in this series. I mean, if this series is going to take place around the Greens versus the Blacks, well, that's pretty much already been written and finished. We know how that's going to end. We won't run into that same mistake that happened with Game of Thrones, which was after Season 5, they didn't know. They were just guessing with where these characters were, with the generalized idea of how they were going to end at. So they were left to fill in way more blanks than they should have, in my opinion. And with this show, since it's already, the storyline has already been mostly completed with just the minor details needing to be filled in, I feel like it has the potential to be, dare I say, an even better show than Game of Thrones. So as far as timeline for cast, I'd say 6 months to maybe even as early as the fall of this year when things really start to open back up for casting announcement. No later than June of 2021, summer of next year, before we have an announced release date. All right, well, hopefully I kept your attention long enough that you made it through this video. I want to thank you all so much for watching. If you could please slap a like on this video, as the like goal is going to be 100, 420. Also, most important part, please make sure you're subscribed and then have your notifications turned on. That way you'll get an alert every single time I drop an upload, which has been, I'll admit, a bit sporadic these past couple weeks. But if you have your notifications turned on, you'll be alerted as soon as I drop a video throughout this long night. Super special shout out again to every single person watching this video, and a special thank you to every single member of my Patreon family over on patreon.com/SirHuntsReviews. I want to thank you all again so much for watching. My name is Mark, and this has been Sir Hunts.